In the sterile quiet of ICU Room 307, Dr. Manuel Oakes froze mid-resuscitation. His hands, trained for a decade to fight death, went still on the small boy's chest. A voice, clear, commanding, yet infinitely gentle, echoed deep inside his soul. "I am this child's healer." And from that moment, nothing in that hospital or in his life would ever be the same again. The only sound in room 307 of St. Luke's Children's Medical Center was the rhythmic, desperate hiss of the ventilator. Early morning darkness pressed against the windows, but inside, the harsh fluorescent lights bleached all color from the room. It was the sterile, silent battlefield where medicine was about to lose its final war. On one side of the bed stood a fortress of technology. Gleaming four poles dripped a cocktail of last resort drugs. Screens displayed a cascade of failing numbers, a digital testament to every scientific weapon that had been deployed. Across from this arsenal, looking impossibly small, was Anthony Jackson. His 8-year-old body was a fragile silhouette beneath the white sheets, lost in a tangle of tubes and wires. In the corner, his parents, Catherine and David, sat huddled together, their only defense a set of worn rosary beads clutched in their hands. The door slid open and Dr. Manuel Oakes entered, the lead pediatric oncologist, a man known for his brilliant strategies against cancer, but not for his comfort with prayer. He'd seen hundreds of cases like this. Stage 4 neuroblastoma against a child. To him, it was another tragic but inevitable data point in a war he was determined to one day win with science, not faith. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the resident on duty, met him with a grim shake of her head. "His pressure is bottoming out, Manuel. There's nothing left to give." Dr. Oakes nodded, his face a mask of clinical detachment. He approached the monitors, his eyes scanning the data with the precision of an engineer reading a failed schematic. "The cascade is terminal," he stated, his voice quiet and final. "The cancer has won." His words were a verdict delivered not with emotion, but with the quiet, devastating authority of science admitting its own limits. For a man who had built his life on the certainty of facts and the power of medicine, this was the painful, familiar end of a long and brutal fight. A fight that had truly begun decades ago, not in an operating room, but in the heart of a 16-year-old boy watching his sister die. The 72-hour countdown began not with a bang, but with a whisper. In the antiseptic bubble of room 307, the Jackson family erected a fortress of faith against the invading army of medical fact. The rhythmic beeping of the failing monitors was met with the gentle cadence of Catherine's voice as she read from the Psalms. The hiss of the oxygen mask was layered with David's soft, near-tuneless humming of old worship songs, his hand resting on his son's frail leg. In a small chair by the window, Emily sat with a box of crayons, meticulously drawing pictures of a smiling boy with brown hair kicking a soccer ball under a bright yellow sun. The staff of the pediatric ICU moved around them with a quiet reverence. They had seen desperate families before, but there was a serene, unshakable quality to the Jacksons' vigil that was both moving and deeply unsettling. Nurse Lisa Brennan, a veteran of the night shift with 20 years of experience, caught Dr. Oakes as he reviewed Anthony's chart at the nursing station. "It's hard to watch," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the family through the glass. "They're such good people. They're just setting themselves up for a worse kind of pain." "I know," Oakes said, his eyes not leaving the cascading numbers on the screen. He agreed with her clinical assessment, but said nothing more. He had made a promise. He found himself drawn to the room, monitoring Anthony's vitals with an obsession that bordered on unprofessional. Every hour, the numbers worsened. The creatinine levels climbed, a stark indicator of kidney failure. Bilirubin followed, a sign the liver was shutting down. The boy's heart, once strong, beat with a weak, fluttering arrhythmia. The medical reality was a merciless, ticking clock, indifferent to the prayers being offered just feet away. Late one afternoon, Dr. Sarah Mitchell cornered him in the break room, her frustration palpable. "Manuel, this has to stop. You're the chief of oncology. Why are you letting them torture themselves with this false hope? It's cruel." Oakes slowly stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking against the ceramic mug. He looked tired, older than he had just a few days ago. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and devoid of its usual authority. "Because hope is all they have left," he said, looking at her directly. "Who am I to take that from them?" Sarah stared, taken aback. In all her time working under him, she had only ever seen the brilliant, detached clinician. For the first time, she saw a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the weary man beneath it. Later, as he was making his rounds, Father Michael O'Brien, the hospital chaplain, approached him in the corridor. He was a kind-faced man with gentle eyes that seemed to have witnessed the full spectrum of human suffering. "I was just with the Jacksons," the chaplain said quietly. "Their faith is extraordinary." He paused. "I've seen miracles happen in this hospital, Doctor." Oakes stopped walking, a cold, familiar anger rising in him. "And I've seen children die," he countered, his voice sharp. "Hundreds of them. Prayer didn't stop their tumors from growing. It didn't restart their hearts." The chaplain didn't flinch. He simply held the doctor's gaze and offered a quiet diagnosis of his own. "Maybe you're angry at God, Doctor, not skeptical of him." The word struck Oakes with the force of a physical blow. He offered no reply, simply turned and walked away, the chaplain's voice echoing in the sudden, vast emptiness he felt inside. That night, the first alarm shrieked through the ICU. Code blue, room 307. Oakes was there in seconds, his team a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Anthony's heart had gone into a dangerous tachycardia before stopping altogether. They worked on him, a frantic, desperate ballet of compressions and medication, and after 2 terrifying minutes, the rhythm returned, weak, thready, but present. The crisis was averted for now. As the response team cleared out, leaving a fragile quiet in their wake, Kate Jackson looked at Dr. Oakes. There were no tears in her eyes, only a profound, almost unnerving certainty. "He's waiting," she said softly. "He's just waiting for Jesus to come." Dr. Oakes stood there, the sweat cooling on his brow, surrounded by the most advanced medical technology in the world. And for the first time in his professional life, he had absolutely no response. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Dr. Oakes was jolted from shallow, restless sleep in the on-call room by the piercing, insistent alarm of the code blue pager. His heart hammered against his ribs before his mind even registered the message. "PICU, room 307. He ran. The fluorescent lights of the deserted corridors smeared past him in a blur of white and sterile blue. He burst through the double doors of the ICU to find the scene he had been dreading. Anthony's monitor was a flat, obstinate green line, emitting a single, soul-shattering tone. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was already on the bed, her hands a blur as she performed compressions on the boy's tiny chest. In the corner, a security guard was gently restraining a weeping David Jackson, while Catherine stood paralyzed, her hands pressed to her mouth, her prayers choked by sobs. "I'm taking over," Oakes commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. He grabbed the defibrillator paddles, charging to 200. Clear. The small body jerked on the bed. The line stayed flat. Again, 300 joules. Clear. Another violent jump. Still nothing. 4 minutes had passed since the code was called. 4 minutes without a heartbeat. Brain damage was no longer a risk. It was a certainty. With a gut-wrenching sense of failure, he prepared to call it, to pronounce the time of death and let the silence in the room become permanent. That's when the impossible began. The temperature in the room plummeted. Not gradually, but instantly, as if a door to a winter void had been thrown open. Oakes saw his own breath mist in the air. Dr. Mitchell gasped, her compressions faltering. The fluorescent lights above them flickered erratically, and the digital readouts on the surrounding equipment began to glitch, their numbers scrambling into nonsense. And in the corner of the room, where only shadows and a discarded-for pole should have been, a light began to form. It wasn't the harsh glare of a lamp, but a soft, internal luminescence, a light that seemed to be alive. Oakes froze, the defibrillator paddles still in his hands. Every rational instinct, every law of physics he had ever learned, screamed that this was not happening. The light coalesced, taking the shape of a man robed in simple, brilliant white. His face was serene, his eyes filled with a compassion so profound it felt ancient, and an authority that seemed to bend the very air in the room. He was more real, more solid, more present than anything Oakes had ever witnessed. The medical staff was paralyzed. Dr. Mitchell let out a small, strangled cry. A nurse dropped a metal clipboard, the clatter unnaturally loud in the suddenly sacred space. The figure moved toward Anthony's bed, not walking so much as gliding, his presence calming the chaos. The Jacksons' desperate cries ceased, their faces transformed by a wave of pure, unadulterated awe. The figure reached out a hand, placing it gently on Anthony's still forehead. And then the voice came. It was not spoken aloud, not a vibration of the air that traveled to their ears. It was a chord of pure truth that resonated in the deepest chamber of every soul in the room, drowning out the flatline, the panic, everything. I'm this child's healer. The moment the words echoed in his soul, the heart monitor beside the bed beeped. Once. It was a tentative, impossible sound against the backdrop of the lingering flatline tone. Dr. Oakes stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process the data. Then it beeped again, stronger this time. The flat green line, jagged upwards, fell, and then settled into a steady, powerful rhythm. It wasn't the weak, struggling beat of a heart just shocked back to life. It was the rhythm of a perfectly healthy child. On another monitor, the oxygen saturation numbers surged, climbing from a critical 68% to 99% in the span of 3 seconds. Anthony's blood pressure, which had been non-existent moments before, stabilized at a textbook 110/70. The ghastly, gray pallor of his skin receded, replaced by the warm, pink flush of life. This isn't possible, Dr. Mitchell whispered, her hands hovering uselessly over Anthony's chest. The figure in white remained beside the bed, his hands still resting on the child's head. His gaze lifted from the boy and met Dr. Oakes's. In that single, timeless look, Oakes saw not accusation, but an ocean of understanding. He saw every child he had failed to save, every prayer he had dismissed with cold condescension, every ounce of buried grief for his sister that he had calcified into scientific pride. The dam he had built around his heart for 26 years shattered. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down his face. The figure spoke again, this time a gentle murmur directed only at the boy. "Wake up, little one." Anthony's eyelids fluttered. They opened. His eyes, clear and bright for the first time in days, focused on the face above him. A small, weak smile touched his lips. "I knew you'd come," he whispered, his voice clear. The spell was broken. Catherine and David Jackson rushed forward, the security guard making no move to stop them. Kate collapsed onto the bed, cradling her son's head, while David fell to his knees beside her, his body shaking with sobs of overwhelming gratitude. Emily, who had been hiding by the door, let out a cry of pure, unadulterated joy. The figure in white began to fade, the light that composed him softening and receding like morning mist. But before he vanished completely, he turned one last time to Dr. Oakes, his final words etching themselves onto the doctor's soul. "You have been trying to be the healer. Now you have seen the healer. Medicine is my gift to you, but never forget, I am the source." And then he was gone. The room's temperature snapped back to normal. The light stabilized, but the miracle remained. Anthony was sitting up, asking for his mother. Dr. Oakes's hand shook as he brought his stethoscope to the boy's chest, his mind reeling. The heartbeat was strong and regular. The lungs were clear. Every clinical sign pointed to an impossible, instantaneous recovery. "Give me a full-body CT, an MRI, and a complete blood panel. Now," he commanded, his voice hoarse. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, her face pale with shock and wonder, asked the question that hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "Manuel, what just happened?" Dr. Oakes lowered his stethoscope, the steady, living heartbeat of the boy still thrumming in his ears. He had no answer. His entire world, the bedrock of logic and science upon which he had built his life, had just been obliterated. At 6 o'clock in the morning, The first rays of dawn broke over Boston, casting a pale, hesitant light into the windows of St. Luke's. Dr. Oakes had not left Anthony's bedside. For nearly 4 hours, he had obsessively monitored every vital sign, expecting some regression, some sign that the event had been a temporary, inexplicable reprieve. But every reading was not just stable. It was perfect. The boy who had been dying at 2:47 a.m. now had the vitals of a healthy child playing in a park. When the radiology team arrived to perform the scans, they were openly skeptical of this order for a patient who, according to the chart, was merely stabilized postcode. 2 hours later, Dr. Oakes stood in the dimly lit imaging lab, staring at the glowing screens. Beside him, Dr. Patricia Lee, the head radiologist, was utterly speechless. On the left screen was Anthony's scan from the previous afternoon, a horrifying map of metastatic disease. Tumors choked his liver, riddled his spine, and clouded his lungs. On the right was the scan from an hour ago. It was completely, impossibly clean. The tumors were not shrinking. They were not necrotic. They were gone. The liver, which had been on the verge of total failure, appeared pristine and regenerated. The lesions on his bones had vanished. "This is impossible," Dr. Lee finally whispered, her finger tracing the outline of a ghost tumor on the old scan. "Cancer doesn't just evaporate. These must be the wrong scans. A mix-up in the system. Run them again," Oakes ordered, his voice tight. The second set of scans confirmed the first. He ordered a third on a different machine. The result was identical. The medical impossibility was now documented with 3 sets of unquestionable scientific evidence. Word began to spread through the hospital like a current. Whispers in the hallways became urgent conversations at nursing stations. Doctors, nurses, and administrators began to converge on the imaging lab, drawn by the incredible rumors. Dr. James Whitmore, the formidable chief of medicine, arrived, his face a mask of stern disbelief. "Manuel, I need an explanation," Whitmore demanded. "What is this? A misdiagnosis from the start." "The diagnosis was correct, James. You know my work," Oakes replied, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. He then recounted what he had witnessed in room 307. The temperature drop, the light, the figure, the voice. Most of his colleagues reacted with predictable skepticism. They offered theories: mass hallucination brought on by stress, a simultaneous equipment malfunction, an electrical surge affecting the staff's perceptions. But Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had followed him to the lab, stepped forward. "I saw him too," she stated, her voice clear and certain. "We all did." Nurse Lisa Brennan, who had been on shift, quickly corroborated the account. The hospital's IT department reviewed the security footage. The camera feed for the hallway and inside room 307 showed nothing unusual until precisely 2:45 a.m., at which point the video devolved into static for 10 minutes before resuming. The audio, however, was partially captured. It recorded the unexplained temperature drop alarm, the sound of multiple electronic devices glitching, and then the staff's audible gasps and shocked whispers. Dr. Raymond Torres, the hospital administrator, called an emergency meeting. "We need to get ahead of this," he said, his voice laced with panic. "We need a rational, scientific explanation before this leaks to the media." In that moment, Dr. Oakes realized the choice before him was not medical, but moral. He could retreat into the comfortable ambiguity of an unexplained, spontaneous remission and protect his career, or he could speak the truth of what he saw and risk everything. The atmosphere in the hospital conference room that afternoon was thick with tension. Dr. Manuel Oakes stood before an emergency meeting of the medical board, a tribunal that included the chief of medicine, hospital administrators, the ethics committee, and 2 lawyers from legal counsel. He was exhausted, but a strange, unshakable calm had settled over him. He had spent the morning at Anthony's bedside, watching the boy eat a bowl of ice cream, laugh with his sister, and ask his parents when he could go home. The joy in that room was more real than any career concern. Dr. Torres, the administrator, got straight to the point. "Manuel, we need to frame this correctly for the official record. The board is prepared to document this as a case of sudden, unexplained, and complete spontaneous remission. There will be no mention of anecdotal religious experiences. The directive was clear: lie by omission. Sanitize the miracle. Protect the hospital's reputation as a bastion of science. Oakes thought of his career, the decades of painstaking work, the publications, the respect he had earned. It all felt like dust in the wind compared to the memory of the light in that room. He remembered the gaze that had shattered his defenses and the voice that had spoken truth directly to his soul. He took a deep breath. "I cannot sign off on that report," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He then recounted the entire story, leaving nothing out. The figure, the voice that spoke within them, the instantaneous healing, and the impossible transformation of the scans. The room erupted. "Are you seriously suggesting we document a supernatural intervention?" one of the board members asked, his face flushing with anger. "This opens the hospital to a firestorm of religious controversy and legal challenges," the lead counsel warned. Dr. Whitmore, the chief of medicine, looked at Oakes with something resembling pity. "Manuel, I know you've been under immense stress. Grief and exhaustion can cause." "I know what I saw, James," Oakes interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "And I know I'm not alone. Dr. Mitchell saw it. Nurse Brennan saw it. The family and security staff saw it. And the scans don't lie." He slid the side-by-side imaging comparisons across the polished table. "Explain this. Medically. Because I can't. And I will not lie about what happened just to make our scientific worldview more comfortable." As if on cue, the conference room door opened. Dr. Sarah Mitchell entered uninvited. "I'm here to go on record," she announced. "I will testify to everything Dr. Oakes has described." Within the hour, written statements from Nurse Brennan and 2 other staff members were submitted, corroborating the account. The board realized with dawning horror that they could not suppress the story. There were too many credible witnesses. This will make us look like a faith-healing tent revival, not a world-class medical institution. Dr. Torres lamented, running a hand through his hair. Dr. Oakes stood to leave, his part in the meeting over. He paused at the door and delivered his parting statement. "I became a doctor because I thought science had all the answers. Last night, I learned that it doesn't. Medicine is a gift, but it has limits. I watched those limits be utterly transcended. Call what you want. I call a miracle." The story broke within 24 hours. A local news station ran a tentative piece about a mysterious recovery at St. Luke's. Within 48 hours, the dam of hospital containment burst, and the national media descended like a storm. The hospital was besieged by reporters, satellite trucks lining the streets. The Jackson family, radiant and profoundly grateful, gave a press conference on the hospital steps. They praised God, they praised the hospital, and they praised the doctor who had been willing to stand by them. Then, Anthony Jackson himself appeared before the cameras. Healthy, vibrant, and articulate, the medically documented terminal patient from just 3 days prior. The global medical community was thrown into a polarized frenzy. Skeptics demanded a full, independent investigation, crying misdiagnosis, faulty scans, or a 1 in a billion natural remission. But Dr. Oakes' stellar reputation made the misdiagnosis claim difficult to sustain. He was known for his meticulous, almost obsessive, accuracy. An external review board examined every piece of data from the past 14 months. The diagnosis was confirmed as correct. The treatment decisions were deemed appropriate. The terminal prognosis was more than justified by the evidence. Pathology slides of Anthony's original tumor biopsies still existed. It was without question stage 4 neuroblastoma. Yet the child was now, inexplicably, cancer-free. Medical journals requested a case study. Dr. Oakes wrote an unflinchingly honest account, detailing the clinical data alongside the supernatural events of that night. Most prestigious journals rejected it, citing its unscientific and anecdotal nature. A respected Christian medical journal, however, published it immediately. The article, "The Case of AJ," documented miraculous healing in a modern ICU setting, went viral. Meanwhile, Dr. Oakes' personal transformation was quiet but profound. Colleagues noticed him stopping by the chapel. They They saw him spending more time with patients' families, not just discussing treatment plans, but listening. His ex-wife, having seen him on the news, called him for the first time in a year. "Manuel," she said, her voice full of disbelief, "you always said prayer was for the weak." "I was wrong," he replied simply. "About a lot of things." The buried grief for his sister finally surfaced, raw and overwhelming. For the first time in 26 years, he visited her grave. He knelt on the grass and wept, not just for the sister he had lost, but for the man he had become in the wake of that loss. He realized he had spent his life trying to be God, to conquer death, rather than a healer working in partnership with a power far greater than his own. 1 month after the miracle, Dr. Oakes was invited to speak at a major oncology conference. The auditorium was packed, thick with skepticism. He presented Anthony's entire case, every scan, every blood panel, every failed protocol. He concluded not with a scientific theory, but with a testimony. "I cannot explain this medically. I can only tell you what I witnessed. And what I witnessed has fundamentally changed how I practice medicine. I will continue to use every tool science gives me, with all the skill I possess. But I will no longer pretend that I am the ultimate healer in the room. I have met him, and he is infinitely greater than any of us." A stunned silence fell over the room. 6 months later, Anthony Jackson remained in perfect health. Every follow-up scan was clear, every blood test normal. His case was officially documented in medical literature as a complete remission with no scientific explanation. The miracle at St. Luke's became a quiet legend, a story whispered among doctors and nurses around the world. Dr. Manuel Oakes still practiced at St. Luke's, but he was a changed man. The brilliant but distant oncologist was now known for his compassion, for praying with families who asked, and for openly acknowledging the limits of his profession. The hospital administration, initially resistant, had changed its tone when patient satisfaction scores soared and donations to the pediatric wing increased dramatically. Families began requesting Dr. Oakes specifically, not just because he was the best, but because he was the doctor who had seen a miracle and had the courage to let it change him. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, profoundly affected, began co-leading a study group on the intersection of faith and medicine. She and Dr. Oakes eventually co-authored a book, Beyond the Scans, When Medicine Meets the Miraculous. At her urging, the hospital established a dedicated prayer and meditation room for the families of critically ill children, a peaceful sanctuary just down the hall from the ICU. The chapel that Dr. Oakes once walked past with disdain was now a place he visited daily, not to bargain, but to listen. Anthony Jackson returned to the hospital only for his checkups, each time bringing a wave of hope through the wards. He would tell his story to other children, his message simple and direct. "Jesus came to my hospital room and healed me. He's real." The final scene of this chapter of Oakes' life takes place late one night, back in room 307. A different child lay in the bed now, a little girl with a difficult prognosis. Dr. Oakes stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder as he spoke quietly with her parents. He didn't promise them a miracle, but he promised them his unwavering presence. When the parents stepped out for coffee, he remained for a moment, his gaze drifting to the corner of the room where the light had appeared. He whispered, to no one and to everyone, "I know you are the healer. Just give me the wisdom to be your instrument." Behind him, a nurse entered with updated lab results. "Doctor," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice, "her white cell count is up slightly. It's a small improvement, but it's there." A slow smile spread across Dr. Oakes' face. He was learning that sometimes God heals in a flash of divine light, and sometimes he heals through the slow, steady march of medicine. Sometimes the miracle is the reversal of death, and sometimes it's a small improvement in a blood count. His job was no longer to control the outcome. It was simply to serve the healer. In room 307 of St. Luke's Children's Medical Center, a doctor learned what every physician must eventually discover. We can only heal what science allows, but we serve the one who heals beyond all limits. And that, he now knew, made all the difference. I have now reached the end of the story as outlined.